The day my grandfather's will was read, I learned how easy it was for a family to erase you while smiling across a polished conference table. I still remember the sound of the lawyer's voice when he said my mother would receive a third, my aunt would receive a third, and my brother would receive the rest after certain expenses were paid. Then he looked down at the page, paused, and said there was no direct bequest to me. No keepsake, no savings. Not even the watch Grandpa always said reminded him of me because I was the only one in this family who shows up on time. My mother did not look surprised. My brother looked almost relieved. My aunt stared at her nails like this was just paperwork. That was the shocking part. The betrayal was worse. I had spent the last 2 years driving to Grandpa's house every weekend, taking him to appointments, sorting his medicine, fixing his meals, and listening when he could not sleep. Yet somehow, I was the one left out. And then came the mystery. Before I could even stand up, the lawyer said there was one final sealed letter from Grandpa, to be opened later under special instructions. Stay with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who believes the truth always finds its way. My name is Lauren Hayes. I was 34 years old, living in Columbus, Ohio, and working as a billing coordinator at a physical therapy clinic. I was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, dropped off casseroles when people were sick, and stayed quiet when people talked over me. I was not weak. I was just used to loving people more than they loved me back. Before all of this happened, my life was simple in a way that felt safe. I lived in a small second-floor apartment with a view of a parking lot and one stubborn maple tree. I worked Monday through Friday, packed my lunch most days, paid my bills on time, and called my grandfather every Sunday evening, whether I saw him that weekend or not. After Grandma died, those calls mattered more. He lived alone in Dayton, in the same little brick house where my mother and aunt grew up. The place always smelled like coffee, lemon polish, and old books. Grandpa Walter was not a soft man, but he was a steady one. He showed love by fixing what was broken. When I was 10, he taught me how to change a tire. When I was 16, he told me never to let anyone make me feel grateful for basic respect. When I was 28 and crying after a bad breakup, he handed me a tissue and said, "Being alone is not the worst thing. Being lied to is." After Grandma passed, I started driving down every other Saturday, then every Saturday, then sometimes during the week, too. I took him to cardiology appointments, set up automatic payments when he got tired of writing checks, and made freezer meals he pretended not to like, even though he always finished them. It felt natural. He was family. He was mine in a way that did not need explaining. At least, that is what I believed then. The first warning signs were small enough to ignore. My brother Mark, who had barely visited in years, suddenly started dropping by more often. My Aunt Denise, who lived 20 minutes away but always claimed she was too busy, began calling Grandpa about important financial matters. My mother, Carol, started asking questions that sounded casual but never were. Did Grandpa still keep cash in the house? Had he updated his insurance? Was the house fully paid off? I told myself they were just finally stepping up. I wanted to believe that. But one Saturday, Grandpa asked me if I had changed his online bank password. I said no. He frowned and said, "Then somebody did." He brushed it off 2 minutes later, but I did not. The next time I logged in for him, I noticed 2 large transfers I did not recognize. Grandpa said Mark had needed temporary help for his business. He tried to say it lightly, but he did not look at me when he said it. That was the first time I drove home with my stomach in knots. Family favoritism had always lived in our house like a quiet draft under a closed door. Nobody named it, but everybody felt it. Mark was younger than me by 3 years, charming when he wanted to be, and always forgiven before he even apologized. If he missed a holiday, he was busy. If I missed one because of work, I was pulling away from the family. When Mark bounced between jobs in his 20s, my mother called him misunderstood. When I worked overtime and skipped a baby shower, she called me cold. Even as adults, it stayed the same. Mark could show up late, empty-handed, and leave early, and my mother still lit up when he entered a room. I could bring a pie, refill drinks, wash dishes, and somehow still hear that I seemed tense. Grandpa saw it. He did not always interfere, but he saw it. At Thanksgiving the year before he died, my mother praised Mark for replacing a porch light at Grandpa's house. She said it in front of everyone, like he had rebuilt the whole place. I had spent the morning at urgent care with Grandpa because his blood pressure spiked, but nobody mentioned that. Grandpa looked across the table at me and said, very quietly, "Some things only count when the right person does them." I smiled like it did not hurt, but it did. As his health got worse, the favoritism got sharper. My mother would tell people Mark was handling the big stuff, even though I was the one sorting medical bills and sitting with Grandpa during tests. Denise kept saying the family needed to think long-term about the house. The way she said house made it sound less like a home and more like a prize. I started noticing that when they visited, they talked around Grandpa instead of to him. They opened drawers while he napped. They whispered in the kitchen. Once, I walked in and saw Denise taking pictures of the dining room set. She laughed and said she was just measuring the space in her condo for fun. I laughed too, because sometimes women are trained to laugh when the truth makes them uncomfortable. The main betrayal did not happen all at once. It came in pieces, each one small enough to excuse, until the full shape of it stood right in front of me. Grandpa had a fall in February. He was released from the hospital with a walker, a stack of discharge papers, and strict instructions not to be alone for the first week. I took time off work. I slept on his couch. I tracked his pills on a yellow notepad and wrote down his blood pressure twice a day. On the third evening, my mother came by with Mark. She looked around the house, tight-lipped, and said I should let family handle things now. I remember wanting to laugh at that word, because what had I been, a delivery service? But Grandpa was tired, and I did not want to fight in front of him, so I went home after dinner. The next morning, when I returned before work, the locks had been changed. Mark opened the door like I was a stranger selling cable. He said Mom thought Grandpa needed less confusion and a more structured plan. My overnight bag was sitting on the porch in a trash bag. I still remember the cold milk and the carton inside, warm by then, leaking into my sweater. My mother called me later and said I was taking things too personally. She said they were only trying to reduce stress. For the next 2 weeks, my visits had to be scheduled. Some of my calls were not answered. When I finally saw Grandpa again, he looked thinner and strangely careful. He hugged me longer than usual and slipped something metal into my hand when nobody was looking. It was a small brass key. He whispered, "Workshop drawer, if you ever need the truth." Then my mother came back into the room carrying a bowl of soup, and the moment was gone. I kept that key in my purse for months, not knowing how badly I would need it. Grandpa died 3 months later, just after dawn on a rainy Tuesday. I was at work when my mother texted me. "He passed peacefully. We'll let you know funeral details." That was it. No call. No asking where I was, no chance to say goodbye. When I got to the house, Denise was already inside making lists. Mark was in the garage with a roll of blue painter's tape marking furniture. My mother said they were getting organized. I stood in Grandpa's bedroom doorway and saw empty spaces on the dresser where his watch box and coin tray used to be. His file cabinet was half open. The top drawer in his desk had been cleaned out. I asked where his papers were. Denise said the lawyer had what mattered. It was the kind of answer that tells you not to ask again. The funeral hurt in ways I still cannot fully explain. Not because it was large or loud. It was neither. It hurt because I felt like a guest at my own grief. My mother asked Mark to speak. Denise read a poem. Nobody asked me anything. Several people came up afterward and told me how much Grandpa had talked about me, how proud he was that I never failed to check on him. I smiled and thanked them while my chest felt hollow. A week later, at the lawyer's office, that hollow feeling became something heavier. Mr. Ellison read the will in a calm voice that did not match the storm building inside me. The estate was modest but meaningful. Cash accounts, some investments, the personal property still in the house, and whatever remained after bills and taxes. My mother and Denise were named. Mark was named. I was not. Then Mr. Ellison cleared his throat and said Grandpa had left a sealed personal letter with instructions that it could only be opened after the formal asset inventory was completed. About 6 weeks, maybe a little longer. My mother said there was no need to drag things out. Mr. Ellison said those were Grandpa's instructions. I walked out without crying, which somehow made it feel worse. After that, my life came apart quietly. I did not lose everything in one dramatic crash. It was slower, like watching cracks spread through a windshield. I went back to work, but I missed details I usually caught. A claim got filed under the wrong code. A patient called angry because of a billing delay, and I had to lock myself in the restroom before I could call her back. Sleep became thin and full of the same thoughts. Why had Grandpa left me out? Had I missed something? Had my family turned him against me while I stood outside those changed locks, telling myself not to overreact? My mother stopped reaching out unless it was about estate logistics. Mark sent one text that said, "Sorry this is awkward." Denise called me emotional when I asked whether Grandpa's tools had been inventoried. Money got tight because I had used unpaid leave during Grandpa's hospital stay. My apartment lease was up in 2 months, and the rent was rising again. For the first time in years, I started packing things I might need to sell. My coffee table, the little gold earrings Grandma gave me. Even then, I did not want revenge. I wanted clarity. I wanted one honest answer. So I made myself a simple plan. I would keep working. I would stop begging for scraps from people who had already chosen their side. And once the estate inventory was done, I would hear that final letter and accept whatever truth came with it. It was not much of a plan, but it was enough to get me through the next day and then the next. Still, every time my phone rang, I hoped it was something that would explain the locks, the missing papers, and the empty space where my name should have been. The unexpected helper came from the last place I thought to look. Her name was Nora Rivera, and she had lived next door to Grandpa for almost 20 years. She was a retired paralegal with silver hair, quick eyes, and a habit of noticing things other people missed. A week after the will reading, she called and asked if I could stop by. She handed me a tin box I recognized from Grandpa's garage shelf. "He gave this to me in March," she said. "He told me to hold it unless things got messy." Inside was an old pocket notebook, 2 spare keys, and a folded piece of paper with one sentence written in Grandpa's blocky handwriting. "If they shut you out, start with the workshop." My hands shook so hard I had to set the box on Nora's kitchen table. I told her about the will. She did not look surprised. She only said, "Your grandfather was not confused the way some people wanted everyone to think." Then she told me something I had not known. During the weeks when my visits were being scheduled, she had seen my mother and Mark taking boxes out of the house after dark. She had also seen Grandpa sitting alone on the back porch one morning, crying. That image broke something in me. Grandpa was proud. I had seen him angry, tired, stubborn, even scared after his heart scare. I had never seen him cry. Nora said she had urged him to call Mr. Ellison then and there. He told her he already had. That was the first time I felt something stronger than grief. It was not rage, it was resolve. The kind that stands up slowly and starts taking notes. Mr. Ellison arranged a supervised visit to the house once the estate inventory team finished cataloging the main rooms. My mother acted insulted that I wanted access to the workshop, as if I were the one being suspicious. The workshop sat behind the house, half garage and half memory. Grandpa had built shelves on every wall and labeled coffee cans full of nails, screws, and washers in neat black marker. I used the brass key on the bottom drawer of his old workbench, and it opened on the first try. Inside were bank statements, copies of checks, a power of attorney form with a big diagonal line through it, and another pocket notebook. This one was newer. On each page, Grandpa had written dates, names, and short notes. Mark requested $12,000. Carol moved funds without asking. Denise took insurance file. Password changed again. Asked Lauren, not her. Did not do it. He had written everything down. Not every feeling, not every argument, just facts. There were also photocopies of 2 transfer slips totaling more money than I made in 2 years. My stomach dropped, but now I had something solid. Mr. Ellison reviewed the papers and grew quiet in a way that made me think he had been waiting for a missing piece. He explained that because the estate was open, he could demand full account records tied to the listed assets. If there had been improper transfers, they could affect how distributions were handled. He did not promise anything. Lawyers almost never do. But he did say, "Your grandfather was documenting a pattern." That sentence carried me for days. The investigation moved slowly, which was almost harder than the betrayal itself. There was no movie moment where someone slammed a folder on a table and everything became clear. It came in boring, painful pieces. The bank records showed a series of transfers made during the 6 months before Grandpa died. Some went to Mark's struggling home repair business. Some were cashier's checks that Denise had deposited into a joint account she shared with her husband. One payment had covered my mother's credit card debt almost exactly. On paper, each transfer had a reason: loan, expense help, temporary advance. But none of them had promissory notes. None had clear authorization from Grandpa beyond the short period when Mark had access under the power of attorney form Grandpa later revoked. Then there were the medical records. Mr. Ellison obtained them after questions arose about the date of the last will update. Grandpa had signed that version 2 days after a hospital stay for an infection that caused confusion. The records did not say he lacked legal capacity. That would have been too simple. But they did show delirium, disorientation, and a note recommending that complex decisions be delayed. Mr. Ellison said it was not enough by itself to overturn the will. Still, it mattered. When Nora wrote a statement describing Grandpa's crying on the porch and the late-night box carrying, it mattered too. When the inventory team reported that several collectible coins listed in older insurance paperwork were missing from the house, that mattered. I started to see the shape of what had happened. Nobody had needed to be a mastermind. They had only needed me out of the way, Grandpa tired and isolated, and enough confidence to believe nobody would question a family helping itself. 6 weeks after the will reading, Mr. Ellison called and asked everyone to return to his office. My mother sounded annoyed on the phone. Mark did not answer my text. Denise arrived with that same sharp smile she wore when she wanted to seem calm. I sat at the far end of the table with my hands folded so nobody could see them shake. Mr. Ellison placed a cream-colored envelope in front of him. The flap was sealed with Grandpa's initials pressed into dark red wax. My chest tightened so hard I had to remind myself to breathe. He opened it carefully and pulled out several pages. The letter was in Grandpa's handwriting. Mr. Ellison read it aloud. Grandpa wrote that if this letter was being opened, then the asset review had been completed, and he expected that what I suspected has likely been confirmed. He said he had changed the will during a period when he felt pressured, weak, and ashamed that his own children were fighting over his property while he was still alive. He wrote that leaving my name out of the will was never meant to erase me. The will, he said, covered only the estate assets left in his individual name at death. Months before that final version was signed, he had placed the house, the largest savings account, and a certificate of deposit into the Walter Hayes Living Trust, naming me as successor trustee and primary beneficiary. He instructed Mr. Ellison not to disclose the trust until the estate inventory and bank review were complete, because he wanted any improper transfers by family members documented before they tried to pressure me into keeping peace at my own expense. I thought the room had already shocked me with all it could. But then came the line that changed everything. Grandpa wrote, "Lauren was the one who cared for me without counting the cost. If she has been made to feel unwanted, then the people responsible should sit with that shame, not her." Attached to the letter was a schedule of trust assets and signed instructions that any prior financial support to Carol, Mark, or Denise should be treated as advances against what little remained for them in the estate. After the missing funds and unauthorized transfers were counted, there was almost nothing left to divide. My mother covered her mouth. Denise went pale. Mark stared at the table like it had opened beneath him. I did not feel victorious. I felt sad in a deep, tired way, because even in protecting me, Grandpa had expected this from them. The regrets came out slowly after that. There were no dramatic confessions. No one fell to their knees. Real life is not that neat. My mother called me first, 3 days later. Her voice sounded older. She said she had been scared about money since the divorce and kept telling herself Grandpa wanted to help the family equally, even when she knew equal was not the same as fair. She admitted she let Mark take the lead because she was afraid of losing him if she pushed back. That hurt almost as much as anything else. Not because it was new, but because it was still true. Mark met me once in a diner off the highway. He looked tired and thinner than I remembered. He said his business had been sinking, he was behind on payroll, and when Grandpa offered one loan, it became easier to ask for another. He claimed he meant to pay it back. I believe he believed that. Denise sent a long email about stress, bad judgment, and misunderstanding Grandpa's intentions. None of it erased the locks. None of it erased the weeks I lost with Grandpa, or the way they had all sat still when my name disappeared from the will. But for the first time, I saw them not as monsters, just as weak people who had made selfish choices and then kept making them because admitting the first one would have hurt too much. That did not excuse anything. It only made the truth less simple. I had the option to push harder. Mr. Ellison said the documented transfers gave us grounds to demand repayment and possibly refer some issues for further legal review. I chose a middle path. We pursued a civil settlement, not a criminal fight. Mark signed a repayment agreement tied to the sale of his business equipment. Denise returned the missing coins and several boxes of documents and photographs. My mother gave back Grandpa's watch box, still dusty from the closet where she had hidden it. I kept the trust assets as Grandpa intended, but I did not try to strip anyone bare. That was not mercy exactly. It was self-protection. I did not want the next 5 years of my life chained to court dates and bitterness. I wanted room to breathe. So I made peace in the only way that felt honest. I set boundaries and kept them. I stopped answering late-night guilt calls. I said no when my mother suggested a fresh start that really meant forgetting the details. I let Mark send his monthly payments without turning each one into a sermon. I gave Denise copies of family photos she actually loved. And then I moved into Grandpa's house for a while, just long enough to hear the floors creak at night and feel him in the ordinary things. his coffee mug by the sink, the little chip in the hallway paint, the workshop radio that still only picked up 2 clear stations. I planted tomatoes in the backyard because he always did. I sat on the porch at sunset and realized peace is not the same as reunion. Sometimes peace is distance with honesty. That house became the start of a new life. I used part of the trust money to pay off my car and finally build an emergency savings fund, something I had never been able to do. I cut my work hours and went back to school for a certification in healthcare compliance, something I had wanted for years but kept postponing because other people's emergencies always seemed louder than my own plans. Within a year, I moved into a better role at a larger clinic, with better pay and steady hours. I kept Grandpa's house, fixed the gutter he had complained about for ages, and turned the spare bedroom into a small office. Nora still came over some Sundays for coffee and pound cake, and we laughed more than either of us expected after a story like ours. My family did not transform overnight. My mother still drifted toward denial when facts made her uncomfortable. Mark still chased easy solutions sometimes. Denise still spoke in careful half-truths. But something had changed. They knew I would not carry the family on my back while they called it love. They knew silence was no longer something they could count on from me. And because I stopped trying to earn a place that should have been mine all along, I became lighter, stronger too, not harder, just clearer. On the first anniversary of Grandpa's death, I sat at his grave with the final letter in my lap. I read the part about shame again, then the part about showing up without counting the cost. For months, I had thought the greatest pain was being left out of the will. But that was not the deepest wound. The deepest wound was how quickly I believed being left out meant I was worth less. Grandpa's last gift was not just the house or the money. It was proof. Proof that I had not imagined the loyalty I gave him. Proof that truth can be delayed without being destroyed. Proof that being overlooked by people who benefit from your silence does not make you small. I used to think family was the people who shared your name and history. Now, I think family is the people who protect your dignity when it would be easier not to. Sometimes those people are blood. Sometimes they are a grandfather with a careful pen, or a neighbor who keeps a promise, or the version of yourself that finally decides enough is enough. If I learned anything from losing Grandpa, finding the truth, and rebuilding my life, it is this. Trust should be given with love, but self-respect should never be given away to keep the peace. Truth may walk slowly, but it still arrives. And when it does not just expose who failed you, it reminds you who you were all along.